Addiction. Boy, let's talk about addictions today. You ready to go?
Should we do a little hello for our audience first, Kevin? Should we say a little how do you do? Little top of the morning to you.
Hello.
Little hello, hello, hello.
Hello, hello, hello.
Do you just knock on someone's door like let's talk about addiction? You say hello, how are you? You wait for a response. Just say let's show the audience
Yes.
a little respect here. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Let's talk about
A little bit of
addiction.
respect.
I'm
All right,
addicted
all
to having
right.
good manners, but yeah.
Haha. Hey guys, how you doing? Today we want to talk about addiction. And I think the reason why we want to talk about it is both of us have actually struggled with addiction. And sometimes when we just think about addiction, we just think about drugs and alcohol. And we totally forget that addiction can also include anything that is to a certain degree socially acceptable, which is vaping, which is masturbation, which is porn, which is sugar, which is Netflix, which is social media. And I think we want to look at addiction from a very wide perspective where we're not just looking at drugs and alcohol separately, but we want to look at them all together because they really affect our biology and the way that we show up in a very, very similar way. So I guess our goal with this topic today is really to unpack this topic, to hopefully, unpack some really useful things that anyone who's dealing with any type of these addictions can use. And by no means are we saying that me and Poya are the addiction experts, right? Because we at times still struggle with our own addictions. We're coming at this more from a place of like, hey, we've struggled a lot with our addictions. We've talked about it a lot. We've overcome it a lot. And we've got a lot of things that we'd like to share with you guys. So that's kind of the place that we're going to come from it. And yeah, see how we go. Poya, anything you want to add to that?
I think the only thing to add to that is we want to also come at this with regard to the spiritual aspect of addiction, I guess. So we'll probably touch on
Mm.
that a bit as well, because I think that's also important.
Yeah,
But
for
I think
sure.
it's also important not to over spiritualize it as well. So there's a balance to be had there. But
Yeah.
I think we'll be all right. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think that's a really good topic that you've even brought it up because that opens a whole new dimension, right? Because I've seen people literally do that where they're like, "Oh, well, it's just a demonic attack." Well, is it, or did you not be smart enough to make sure that the donut wasn't there in the first place, or were you not smart enough to make sure that you didn't really, you know, you didn't entertain the devil in the first place? So, there is a whole, and we'll get into it in a second, but let's go through the why. Um, so first of all, why is this topic important, Poya?
Why is this so important? Well, I think addiction is one of the biggest it's one of the biggest killers
Mm.
in modern society, right? Like alcohol addiction, drug addiction. You could even make the argument for sex addiction, other things. Like it's a cause of death for a lot of people. So it's like a more like intense sort of, I guess, element to it. Like, the importance of this topic is that we need to know about addiction because if we don't, then we become susceptible and it can lead to severely negative health outcomes like smoking leads to like lung cancer and all sorts of other things. Um, but it can also get in the way of you fulfilling your purpose and just being a functional human being, right? Like even my own struggles with certain addictions, it got in the way of my productivity, whether it was at uni, or even work or my personal life and certain projects I'm working on. Because your addiction, when you're indulging in your addiction, it's taken away from your time. So when you lose time, you don't get that time back, and that's time you
Mm.
can contribute to people, to your projects, to work, to growing as a person, to God, to your relation with
Mm.
God. So addiction's almost like I guess like now what I'm visualizing, it's like this black hand that just keeps pulling you back. It's like trying to
Mm.
hold you back. It's like
Yeah,
there's all these
yeah,
good things over here. It's like, nah, mate, I'm pulling you in. And so it's this destruct yeah, it's a really destructive force. If we don't
yeah,
have these conversations about addiction, if we don't understand it, then we don't know how to fight it back against that black
yeah,
hand that pulls us. Um,
yeah, yeah,
yeah. What are your
yeah.
thoughts, Kevin?
I love it. I love the analogy that you gave that it's like a dark force that's pulling you back. And the question I'd like to ask you, because I love that analogy, is like, what is it pulling us back from?
That's a really good question. Okay, so I think, let me think. I think, yeah,
I'll
you
give you
go.
my answer for a second,
Yeah.
because I do think we're definitely going to see this in similar and different ways. But it's like I find it that it directly pulls us away from what we're born to do.
Hmm.
Um, I feel like, which we'll get into a little bit later on, but it's almost like a symptom that we're not doing what we're actually born to do. And if you listen to our last podcast when we were talking about purpose, I would say purpose is almost to a certain degree a human's antidote to doing to not pursuing addictive behaviors, because it's something that's meaningful. And remember, Viktor Frankl, who was a psychologist who survived the Nazi concentration camps, he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning, and he says that he who has no meaning in his life distracts himself with useless pleasures or addictions. And when you're doing something meaningful in your life, or something which is what I would call doing your purpose, then that is the antidote to, you know, not pursuing your addictions. So I feel like your addictions, that black hand that Poy is talking about, pulls you away from doing what you're born to do. And I think it pulls you away from other things. It pulls you away from your having authentic relationships. It pulls you away from being present. It pulls you away from having a clear mind. It pulls you away from 1,000 different things. But I'll let Poya answer this.
So the question is, what does addiction pull you away from?
Mm.
It pulls, I
If
think
it because if it is like a dark hand,
yeah,
what is it? What is it pulling you away from?
I think it's two things. Or yeah, I think it's two things. So the first thing is pulling you away from it's pain.
Mm.
Because that's why
Oh yeah.
the addiction exists, right? It's like you're in pain. Like that's usually what instigates it, right? It's like when someone relapses on drugs or someone watches porn or someone has a vape or whatever. The first thing I think that's triggering it is pain. And pain is
Mm.
everywhere. The other element of it is it's pulling you away from things that will be good through pain. Or actually, no, let me rephrase that. So it's pulling you away from pain, but it's pulling you away from good things. And sometimes those are linked, sometimes they're not. Sometimes, you want to go watch a movie or something and you love movies, right? But then the pleasure of the addiction is more. So it's pulling you away from that good thing. Um, or, it's pulling you away from, hey, I got to like write this business proposal, which will lead to a really good thing and a sense of achievement, but it's going to be a painful process. So it's pulling you away from that. So it's pulling you away from from pain, but it's pulling you away from good things as well. And sometimes the pain is linked to the good thing, which I think makes it more complex. But in the end, that's what it's pulling you away from those two things. Yeah, I would say.
Mm. Yeah,
Yeah,
I know what you mean. I guess what I was meaning is looking at it a little bit more of a more like a wider perspective of, in the big scheme of things, what is it pulling you away from?
your
It kills
purpose,
your
right? Yeah,
relationships and all those things.
yeah,
But in a granular perspective, you're absolutely right. It's in that moment pulling you away from pain. It gives you certainty. And what is certainty? It's the assurance that we can avoid pain and we can see pleasure, right? And what we seem to think, we might think, hey, look, like, isn't everything that we do from that place? And not entirely, right? If you're having a kid and you're looking after your kid, you're not looking after your kid because it's going to give you pleasure and not pain. You know for a fact looking after your kids is going to give you both, right? So I think things that are meaningful pursuits, we experience both the positives and the negatives. But when you're seeking just pleasure, you're just only looking for the positives. Um, and I think I think addiction just gives us that short-term gratification, that avoidance of pain and seeking pleasure, and often it just makes things worse. Often it's almost like I think Huberman one day gave kind of like an explanation where it's like, this is your baseline happiness, and then what tends to happen is, remember, because there's like a law that goes, whatever goes up must come down. So it's like, if this is your baseline happiness, let's just say you look at social media, you pull on a vape, you eat some sugar, you have a drink, you have a smoke, whatever it is. It's like now elevates your happiness, because let's just say we were to consider dopamine as happiness, so it elevates your level of happiness. But every time it elevates your level of happiness, it must come down. So it elevates your amount of happiness, and then it goes down. And then in order to now get just back to the baseline happiness, you need to have more. So now what you're doing is you're not almost having more to just get high. You're getting more to actually just feel normal again, right? And then it actually just goes down and down and down, right? And this is why people say that addictions can regulate your neurons, downregulate your dopamine, which means that permanently they can get to the point where you're not really happy. And I would also say, a lot of like these days, there's so many studies coming out that we are some of the most depressed and anxious and angst-ridden generation of all time. And I would definitely say it's got to do with social media. It's definitely got to do with how much dopamine that we are continuously stimulating on an everyday basis. I mean, if I look at just a granular perspective, the day that I spend a lot of time on my phone is the day that I feel empty, the day that I feel meaningless, the day that I feel crap. But it's the day where I am not consuming sugar, social media, whatever it is, that I'm automatically engaged in things that have meaning, like meaningful projects, and I feel more fulfilled. So it really, I would say, number one, the way that life is set up, that there's so much technology that consumes so much of our dopamine and stimulates us all the time, really leaves us in a really bad place. And the more that we pursue these things, the less it just takes us away from doing something or feeling a very meaningful life, if that makes sense.
Bro, that makes so much sense. I love how you brought up the dopamine. Sort of, I guess I don't know, the dopamine sort of fluctuations where, yeah, I remember you were telling me once that like people who masturbate in the morning like tend to be like it like ruins you for the rest of the day because it's like you get this mad dopamine hit, so then that's where your baseline is, and so the rest of your day you're trying to meet that. And yeah, I've seen people talk about like dopamine detoxes and stuff like that to try and like bring them back down to like regular levels. So I like that you brought that up because I think that's super important, the chemical element of addiction, where like the more that you succumb to the addiction, the more that powerful it becomes. It's because there's that physical element where, yeah, your dopamine, whatever you want, receptors or whatever, like the level of your dopamine baseline keeps getting higher and higher. And so you have to keep like escalating. And that's, yeah, like people say, like you're saying with drug, yeah, with drugs, right? Like people, I guess from what I've heard, people who are addicted to drugs will start with like the lighter stuff, and then they get to the heavier stuff, like the cocaine, the heroin.
Absolutely.
I've heard with porn as well, like people who like, some people who watch porn, like it gets to a point where even normal stuff won't like get them going, so they have to watch like really violent and like
really violent,
intense things.
screwed up stuff, bro. So
Yeah.
true.
And
so true.
It's because it becomes the normal. And I reckon Instagram, like honestly, I think with Instagram, like Instagram's become like a softcore pornography platform, right?
Yeah,
and I think
sure.
I think it's desensitizing so many people, particularly young boys, to I don't know, I think it's desensitizing them sexually in the sense of like there's softcore pornography that's available, right? And so as they get older, they're like, well, I need more of a hit. They're probably gonna like get into harder stuff, I think. Probably. I'm sure there's been studies on it, but I can see that happening. Or even just in general, just like the way phones are designed as well. It's quite nefarious. Like a lot of from what I've heard, I heard this, I don't know if it's true, it probably is. But like I think the Facebook app and even the Instagram app, they're designed, like the notification sounds are designed by the same people who do the sounds for like the what are they called, the pokey machines, because it just like captures your attention. So we're living in a world as well where everyone is trying to, well, this is the other element of it, right? Because I think Alex Hormozy talks about this. Attention is the greatest currency in our current age, right? What does addiction do? Takes away your attention, right? And you have all these companies like Facebook, Instagram, and no shade. We use their platforms, like, and there's a lot of good out of those platforms. I don't think they're all bad, but we can't deny they're designed to hold our attention. And we have all these people, as you're saying, like you're saying, even when the days you're on your phone are the days where you feel the most empty. I have that. I've struggled with phone addiction. I've struggled with I have to block social media on my phone for the whole day. For this Instagram account, I have to go on my iPad and do it because I can't trust this thing. So I have this blocked until after 5 o'clock. Same with YouTube because like that's an addiction I've really struggled with. Like I lost like days of my life to social media during uni because I was such an
For
addict. But they're
sure.
designed that way, and we're
For
living in this
sure.
world where everything is designed to addict us.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other
Yeah.
thing. I think that's a terror. That's like
Yeah.
that's why this is so important as well. We're living in this world which is designed to hold our attention. Everything's trying to pull us. So you've got multiple black ants. They're trying to pull us this way, that way, and
Yes. Yes.
and not only that, it's like trying to pull us away from God. I think that's the other element. That's the spiritual element, right? Like if you're a
Yeah. Yeah.
Christian,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
it's pulling you away from God. You could like, you know, instead of reading my Bible, I'm bloody on Reddit looking at like rubbish, or I'm on Instagram just seeing what my friends are doing or going on meme pages. Like, what? Yeah. So that's
Yeah.
another
Yeah.
thought that just came to me.
Poya, like, yeah, I think what you're saying is so important because I think so many people are going, yeah, I resonate with that. I've been stuck at 3 a.m. reading Reddit articles of God knows what. I've been stuck on scroll holes that have gone for hours. I've wasted so much of my life. And I first of all want to say to anyone who's listening, you're definitely not alone, number one. And number two, I just want to hammer in that point that people are paid ungodly amounts of money to sit there all day and think about how to keep you as addicted as you possibly can to this screen. Because the more that you look at this screen, the more ads they can put in front of your eyeballs, which means the more people buy. So I get it. It's funny because I use ads for my business. So I understand I want more attention, and this is just the attention economy. So it's almost like, to a certain degree, I know there's a lot of people who go, everything is a conspiracy. No, I just think some things are just business and just the way things work. And that's the way technology has just accelerated things. But I think in the grand scheme of things, you are almost fighting a losing battle. You're fighting a losing battle because there's so much that's trying to pull you away. And it's so easy, it's so attractive for you to, wake up in the morning and the first thing you want to do is you look at your phone because it just gives you a hit of happiness, that you look at that red notification and it's like, oh, yes, I've got a like, or yes, I've got a follow, or yes, I've got a comment. You know what I mean? And it's just, you know, that little feeling that you get. And the funny thing is, what I've noticed is whatever I start off in the morning looking at is the thing that drives me, my addiction, the whole day. So it's almost like if I at times when I used to pull on the vape, I'd pull on the vape in the morning. I need the vape the whole day. If I have a look at social media in the morning, I need the social media the whole day. If I look at, some, like Poya is saying, for attractive girl on social media, I find myself when I'm scrolling, sometimes I put them. I'm not gonna lie, it happens at times, right? So it's like, first thing I'll say is I think we've got to really start by protecting our morning. And I like what Poya used, which is the whole thing of dopamine detox. Dopamine detox is really powerful. And if you want to know how powerful it is, think about this. Have you ever had a time where you're going on a road trip and there's a point after 8 hours, people are just been playing music and you're just sick of it. And you're just like, just turn the music off. I've been listening to music for like 8 hours, just turn it off. I just want peace and quiet. Right? And that's when your brain is done. But then all of a sudden, if you didn't hear music for a long time, and all of a sudden your favorite song came on, how would that make you feel? Right? Extraordinary. And that really just shows the power of a dopamine detox, what it can actually do in a very, very powerful way. And I would get you guys to give this a go. Everything that you gives you dopamine, whether it's food, whether it is sugar, whether it is porn, whether it's social media, whether it's Netflix, whatever it is, if you just find a time and say, you know what, I'm going to give it a break for a day or two, I can guarantee your happiness levels will go right up. Because here's what I want everyone to understand. When you are seeking pleasure, your body is experiencing more pleasure, but the sense of well-being and the sense of meaning that you have in your life is right down. So the more pleasure you seek, the less meaning that you will have, right? So the less, it's like the more empty that you will feel. Think about this. The day that you're just watching Netflix the whole day, do you feel meaningful? No. It's the day when you have a productive day, you get stuff done, you do things that matter to you, to your purpose, to your values. And then maybe the towards the end of the day, you come and enjoy a little bit of Netflix. You really enjoy that Netflix. We can't even enjoy the pleasures that we have, right? Because we've consumed them so much. And it's almost like I feel like God has given us our pleasures to enjoy. It's like at the end of the day, it's not even that God is saying, I don't want you to experience pleasure. It's almost like what he's saying is, I want you to experience pleasure the best you possibly can. Because we all know what happens when we sit there and we watch TV shows all day. We feel like crap. So he's pretty much saying, it's like he's giving us boundaries and the way that we work for us to enjoy the pleasures that we have at our most optimal. Everything in moderation to a certain degree. So anyway, I just feel like what I would suggest for anyone out there who's starting this journey of or dealing with addictions is to not just dopamine detox once in a while, somehow find a way to make it part of your life, right? Whether that is on the weekends, whether that is certain pockets of the day, whether you just detox more in regards to just doing some of the things that you give you instant gratification a little bit less. Whatever you do, any of those things are going to, I would say, give you more life force. Because I really heard this quote that puts it carefully. All of these dopamine addictions, anytime what it's doing is it gives you a sense of happiness. It gives you a false sense of happiness. And every time that you are doing anything that elevates your dopamine, you are stealing happiness away from your future self.
Oh, I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah. Anyway, I'll leave that there. Poya, what do you have to say on this? I know we can talk about this forever. This is a big
Bro,
topic.
I have so much. I don't think we can scratch the surface. Like, there was something else I wanted to touch on, which was which I'll come back to because it's about how you were saying before, like, when you look after your kid, you're not just there's like pain and pleasure there. What addiction, indulging is pure pleasure and how responsibility ties in. So I want to come back to that. But before I do, I think like it's really important to go through, and we may have already, I don't remember if we already done this in this episode, so I apologize if we have. But I don't know if we've gone over the common mistakes with this topic, have we, Kevin? Because I think that's important to lay out. We kind of touched on it a little bit.
Oh, no, we haven't. All
All
That's
right, I
really
reckon
important.
let's get into that a bit because I think that's really important. I find that like some of the major mistakes I've seen with people's understanding of addiction. So I'll start on the more like psychological front. It's like, well, if you know it's bad for you, why do you do it? I've seen certain people who are famous on the internet that I'm not a fan of. Kev, I think you know who I'm talking about, who've said, oh, if I just don't want to do it, I won't do it. I think there is a little bit of truth to that. So Robert Downey Jr., who phenomenal actor. I don't if for those of you who don't know his whole story, the guy was like a young star, very acclaimed, very critically acclaimed actor, but was heavily addicted to drugs. It ruined his first marriage, and it got to the point where he did that jail time. Absolute mess. It was so bad that most like I guess studios wouldn't hire him because his insurance cost was too high. Mel Gibson actually had to pay for it for a film. I think it was Scanner Darkly or Kiss Kiss Bang. No, Gothica, I think, which I haven't seen. But like he had to pay for he offered to pay for the insurance so Downey would get hired, which led Downey to becoming Iron Man. And now Downey is like huge, right? But like Downey had no prospects, and when he was addicted, I think it was when he got out of jail. I think he was eating this hamburger, like a Burger King Whopper or something in a car park, and he couldn't taste. It tasted crap. And he loves those burgers. And that's when he was like, the hell am I doing? And he took all the drugs in his car, tossed them into the sea. And then I remember it was on Oprah and he was talking about his addiction, and he was like, he's like, you can stop if you wanted. The hardest thing is just wanting to. So I think like we have to be careful with that where, I think people go the other way where it's like, well, if you really want to, just stop. I'm like, well, it's hard. There's a physical element. I know my own struggles with addiction. I was struggled, like when I was younger, I struggled with, adult content, right? And I remember when I was trying to like stop, I would have physical withdrawals. Like my body would be in pain because I was so used to it. And I'd be going crazy. I'd be like just pacing around the room. I'd be agitated. I'd be depressed. This was like for first 10 weeks. After that, now it's awesome. Like after that, my life was so much better. And the time I got back, but it was so intense. And that's why, I would relapse because I'm like, I can't do this. And it's so
Mm,
easy to judge people. But when you're in that, when you feel that, when your body, your nervous system is like going against you, when
mm,
it's terrifying, Kevin. I'm sure
mm.
you felt this in your struggles with addiction.
100%.
It's horrific. But then there's the other element where it's like you have to actually want to.
Mm,
And I think that's the thing. I remember my first few times trying to get out of it, I really didn't want to. I told myself I did, but deep down I didn't. And I think why it's important to want is it gives you that extra drive to beat through those physical withdrawals where it's like, I want to get over this. I want it. Like I will go through the pain. Like if you're Kevin, if your kids were held at, I don't even want to say this, but I think like held at gunpoint, right? Across like a fire, like what are those called? Those hot coals?
mm.
I know for a fact you would like sprint over them.
100%.
It would hurt so much, your feet would be destroyed, but you would do it because you love your
Mm,
kids.
mm,
And that's because you want to protect them. The want is greater than the aversion of pain. And I think what Downey Jr.
love
was
it.
saying is the want to overcome the addiction was greater than the pain. So it's not as simple as be like, oh, if you don't want
Mm,
to do it, just don't do it, cuz. But it is a matter of you have to want it. So I think that's an important acknowledgement. I think from a Christian perspective, there's a spiritual element where it's like, just pray it away. Just read your Bible more.
mm.
Bro, like,
Oh,
I don't
yeah.
know,
Here we
man.
go.
Look, I'm just gonna be honest. I
Here
don't
we
think
go.
reading your Bible just by itself will stop it. I think it will help a lot. I think it will help a lot. I think you should do it. You should be
Yeah.
reading your Bible if you're addicted. I think if a good way to overcome addiction is to try and replace it with better habits like prayer and stuff. But I think as well, it's important to acknowledge a lot of addiction comes from trauma. I think we can both be open here. We both had very traumatic childhoods. And I
Mm,
know for a fact my addictions, whether it's adult content or phone or whatever, came because of like trauma experience as a child. Right.
mm,
And,
mm.
I think praying about it and relying on God has helped a lot. I don't think I could have done it without him 100%. Like,
Mm,
and
mm.
that's the beauty of being Christian. We have the Holy Spirit on us. The Holy Spirit helps us. Um, he renews our hearts. The word sanctification, which I think means, yeah, it's like it makes you more like Jesus, right? And that's
Mm,
important for addiction. But it's important to also understand the psychological element. Like, why are you doing this? And I know for me, going to a psychologist really helped to understand why I was addicted to certain things, whether like anything, even my phone. There was a psychological trauma behind it. And I think you can't have one without the other. So I think there's also the other way where it's like, don't even pray that it's purely psychological. Like, no, there is a spiritual element to it. I think the devil is always trying to mess with us, right?
mm,
Especially I think if you're doing something right, if you're on the right path, the devil's gonna be like, don't like that. I'm gonna try and mess with you.
mm, mm,
Um,
mm.
so
Yeah.
I think what happens is we either over spiritualize it or we under
Yep.
spiritualize it as well, and both are very
Yes.
dangerous.
Both are very,
And
very
personally, I would
dangerous.
rather over spiritualize it than under. What are your thoughts, Kev?
First of all, man, you raised so many great points. I wouldn't, I would say either are just as bad because even if you over spiritualize it, um, that could really distort your walk with Christ. Absolutely
Yeah,
distort it.
true. That's true.
It could distort your walk with Christ, and it could lead others massively astray as well. Okay. So if you're going around and telling people, oh, everything is demonic, then you're walking around, you're telling other people to stop taking responsibility of their lives, right? And that's a huge thing. So I think from what you're saying, I think the important thing to understand is that there is a balance, there is a duality. When it comes to handling your addiction or almost handling anything, but specifically addiction, there must be a balance of taking responsibility, and that means being disciplined. That means getting rid of the right things. That means putting the right practices in place and encouraging the right behaviors and maybe going to therapy and doing the work, but also surrendering and realizing that you can't do it on your own. And it's so funny
Mm,
that even if you look in 12 step, right, which is a world renowned program on overcoming alcohol and drug addiction, one of the steps is realizing that you can't do it on your own.
yeah.
So, but if it was all just I'm surrendering, I can't do it on my own, I'm just leaving it in God's hands, then you're not taking any responsibility and doing the right things. So I think what God calls us to is to take responsibility and do the therapy, do the work that we need to do, put in the right habits in place, get rid of the wrong habits, to the best of our ability, do what we can, but at the same time surrender that you can't do it on your own. Okay. And I think that's really just a formula for a great life. It's almost like do your best and God will do the rest. But if you just expect God to do the rest without doing your best, then you're going to get nothing. If you just do your best, right, without letting God do the rest and surrendering to God, then you're going to be really highly strung and trying to control everything, and you're going to live a really, really anxious life. Okay, so the answer is there's got to be a balance of taking responsibility and also surrendering to God at the same time, because you can't do it on your own. However, listen to this. This is very, I could say controversial what I'm about to say. You can't just do it just with God. It's got to be both. Because God has given you a brain to use. And if you're just saying, God, I want you to do everything, he's looking at you and he's going, I've given you a bloody brain to use. I've given you one of the most complex devices in the history of the universe, and you're not using that. Whose fault is it then? Right? So it's got to be both of us. We have to take responsibility and be disciplined, but we also have to do God as well. And sometimes we just can't do it on our own. And I think that the balance of that is like, it's like there's been many moments where I've done everything that I can, but in my moments of temptation, I've just said, God, you know what? Right now, I can't do it. Help me. And somehow he'll put something in the way, or something. We were just talking about this morning, right? Put something in the way, or something will happen, or he'll find a way to, to help out, right? So I think that's the way that God calls us to something. And it's funny that this topic also crosses into the whole topic of, what people would call as manifestation, but what I would just call as the art of getting what you want, of achieving goals and getting what you want. And I think it's the same principle. If you're just taking action and trying to control everything through being disciplined and doing everything you can, but you're not trusting in a higher power, you feel like you are trying to control everything on your own and you feel really anxious, right? But if you just, do the whole, I'm just trusting in the universe, I'm just trusting in God that what I want to happen will happen, then you're not going to get what you want. You can't just look at jewelry and just hope that it's going to fall in your hands and it just falls in your hands, right? You have to be able to do both. And this is what I've realized, even in my business. I work towards my goal. I take the actions. I work hard. I'm disciplined. But at the same time, I trust that I can't control the outcome. And I just got to surrender to God. And it's that dance, it's that balance that not only it just brings all good outcomes, whether it's a relationship, right, that we're looking for. You do your work, but you trust in a higher power and you surrender. Whether it's addictions, you do your work, you take responsibility, but you surrender, you can't do it on your own. Whether it's something that you want to achieve, you take action, but you surrender to a higher power that you can't do it. And what that does is it allows you to achieve something from a sense of flow and from a sense of growth as well.
Huge, bro. Yeah. Oh man. And like, just to add to that, I think God just respects us too much to do everything for us. It's like when you have a kid, right? Like, I mean,
What
when
a
you're
quote.
kids, right? You have kids. So imagine you want them to be autonomous, right? So say at a certain age when they're probably
Is that a quote you got from somewhere? Because that's a really good quote. God respects us too much to do everything for us.
That's just me, baby. That's just me.
That's
I'm
good. That's
trademarking that. That's a
good.
Poya Dari Shahi quote,
That's a
quote right there.
that's a good quote. Yeah, go on.
Yeah. Make a banner out of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, like with your kids, right? I'm sure if they, let's say they're like old enough to be able to handle knives and pans and stuff, and they're like, Dad, make me an omelet. I feel like you'd be like, no, son, I'm going to teach you how to make an omelet and you're going to do it yourself. And that is more loving because it's like you're teaching them to be autonomous. And I think God wants us, I think, he respects us too much to just like do everything for us. He wants us to have some level of autonomy and independence. We still in step with him, right? And that's the whole point of giving us, I think, the law, right? The thing, the law is there is there to give us a fulfilling life. Like, do not steal, do not commit adultery. It's restrictions, but there's still freedom within those boundaries. You can still make beautiful things. I remember you sent me this video of the preacher who had like a guitar and he flipped it on the back. He's like, I could play it like this, where it's just like he's banging on the back of the guitar and stuff, but it doesn't
Oh,
sound
you
as
love
good,
that.
right?
Yeah.
I love that
Yeah.
video. And then he turns it around. He's like, but if I play within the boundaries, which is the strings and all of that, I still have freedom to make really beautiful music and it'll actually sound good and be good. And I think that's the same with this sort of stuff and with how God like gives us autonomy. Now, how that ties into addiction is interesting because I think the Bible has some really helpful things. So Jesus, Jesus is so like just on point when he says anything really. But I think in a few of the Gospels, like he talks about how if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. If your hand causes you sin, chop it off. And it's not literally saying to mutilate yourself. So please, no one, we don't want anyone messaging us saying, I chopped off my hand and still addicted. All right, that's on you. That's on you, bro. Don't do it. Don't
Although
cut
I
off your
would say
hand.
that would be a pretty impactful podcast.
It would also be a
But
very
anyway,
impactful lawsuit.
go on,
But
go
anyway,
on.
we are not legally responsible, so don't do that. But what he's saying is, if there are things that are causing you to sin, remove them from your life. And that ties into addiction. For me, look, dude, I struggle with lust. I think a lot of guys do, but I struggle with it. So I don't use the Instagram app often. I'll use it on browser. And when I do use the app, I lock the app until 5 o'clock. And even then, it's like I'll log in, post something, and then delete the app. Right? Like I rarely have the app on my phone. That's why I sometimes take my time with replying to instant messages because I just don't go on there much. There's certain movies I avoid. I'm pretty like I love cinema, so I'll watch like weird art house stuff, but there is certain things that I even avoid. I even don't watch certain sitcoms because of how it affects my brain, right? And triggers addiction. Um, I'm even addicted to like just being like angry about stuff. Like I remember this a lot of political in 2021. I would consume a lot of political content. I just became very angry and bitter and horrible.
Oh, I
So,
remember.
bro, you
That was a
remember.
phase for you. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I started
Yeah,
distancing
and it's
myself.
funny that now that you bring up, I realize that you don't do that as much now.
No. I'm
Yeah.
like because I realized how it affects me. Even like, there were certain foods I was even addicted to, and I was like, I'm just not gonna go near those areas or whatever. Or even just like the victim mindset, which is so attractive, which I think was an addiction for me.
Mm,
And so
mm,
I avoid anything that even says that. And I sort of moved away from certain friends that lived in that mindset because it just wasn't helpful. But I guess what I'm
mm,
trying to get at here is if you struggle with an addiction, and I want to firstly say a lot of people do, it's actually quite normal, even if it's severe. I want to say, please don't shame yourself. Like we're all messed up, and also if you know someone has addiction, don't judge them. You be grateful that like you don't have to carry that burden and be there for them. Like I've
mm,
had friends who had all sorts of addiction, drug, sex addiction. It's actually sex addiction is rampant in the church. I know so many guys who struggle with it, whether it's just porn or even like hooking up or whatever. Do not judge them. We're
mm,
all struggling, and that is not going to bring anyone to repentance. All right,
mm.
it's not. And look, I want to be gentle with you guys who judge. I get it, like, but it's like that's not going to help. And that's why with Jesus, when he saw the people who were broken and addicts of broken people, he was so gentle and kind. He was firm, but he was gentle and kind. Um, and so I just want to
Mm.
encourage you: if you know someone is, if someone opens up to you about an addiction, even if it sounds crazy to you, don't judge them. Be just beat them where they're at. Be gentle, because that is what will actually heal them, right? And I think if you struggle with an addiction, please don't shame yourself. Like honestly,
Well,
just like
you know what?
yeah. Oh
On,
yeah,
on this topic, right? On this topic, what I'm sensing is what you're saying is it's almost like being Jesus, which is have a sense of have a balance of justice and or it's really just be merciful, right? But here's a question I'll
yeah,
ask you. It's like what we're starting to now realize, especially as we're speaking about this, we've talked about this many times. There's got to be a balance. There's got to be a duality between mercy and justice, because it's like if it's just mercy, then people will just take advantage. If it's just justice,
yeah.
then people cannot have compassion, and people will sit in their shame, and that'll actually make them worse. So what would it look like, when approaching people with addiction, or and by the way, we've just got into a completely different topic, which is now handling or navigating relationships with other people who have addictions. How would you navigate that from a place of justice and mercy together?
I think mercy is always the first option. I think at the start, mercy. You want to, and that's because you want to assume the best of the person. I think you want to assume that they do want to work and they want to take responsibility. I think we're like a more hard line
Oh,
approach.
would you really agree with that? Because I wouldn't agree with that. I don't think that some people want to take responsibility.
No, I think you come in first with the assumption. You want to have, I think you come in with the best possible, the most charitable assumption of someone, right?
Right.
Because it gives, because the reason I say is I think it gives them, I personally think it gives them a confidence that they can overcome it, right? And that you're for
Yeah.
them because they probably feel a lot of shame.
Yeah.
So for example, say I had a friend come up to me and was like, hey bro, I really struggle with like shoplifting, right? This is a made up example. This isn't based on anything real. And they're like super shake. They're like already there. It's hard for them to even tell me. They're like shaking. And I'm like, bro, don't judge you. Like we all struggle with stuff. We look, what you're doing is wrong, but like
Yeah.
I'm not
So
going to
good.
judge you. Who am I? Like who's to say I wouldn't be the same if I didn't go through what you went through? Now, how are we going to work through this together, right? And
Wow.
then
I just
you
had big insight. Go on. Yep. Go
okay,
on.
and then you develop a plan or something. Maybe set up some accountability partners. Maybe get them into a program, right? The issue is if they keep like doing it and they start lying to you, and then they start, like, and dude, I've done this when I've had people keep me accountable, and they don't they start making excuses.
Mm.
That's when the tough love comes in, but it always has to be rooted in love, and that's where you're like,
Yeah.
bro, like, yeah,
And I just want to give a powerful framework to what you're saying because this goes into a completely different topic.
mm,
It goes into authenticity. And here's what I mean. Now, remember, guys, there is a line, and authenticity is who you are really when you are not puffed up in pride and you are not down in shame, right? So, pride is when you are exaggerating yourself above what you are, right? And you're looking down on people and you're resenting people or you're being a douchebag to people. And shame is when you're putting yourself below what you really are. And maybe you're beating yourself up, you're telling yourself that you're not good enough, and you're looking up to people and you're putting other people on a pedestal. Now, the aim of the game of anything is to be as authentic as you possibly can. And one of the examples that you gave, and by the way, authenticity is not when you're puffed up and you're being a douchebag. It's not when you're down and you're being a doormat to others, but it is when you are centered. So what you're talking about is when someone comes from a place of shame and goes, "Hey man, I'm really struggling with this shoplifting thing. What do?" Your goal is to lift them up into authenticity and be like, "Oh, it's okay. You've got this," and
mm,
use mercy. But if they're puffed up with pride and they go, "Oh, I'm fine. I don't need this." Maybe they might need that confrontational conversation that goes, "Hey, bro, I think that you really need to take responsibility here." Right. And if they're lying, that's also them puffing them up because what they're doing is they're thinking that they know better than you. So it's like a pride of, I know better than him, so I'm just going to lie to him, right? So I think the aim of the game for you guys to navigate this situation is that when you can sense that they're into pride and there's a certain connection or relationship that you have that's appropriate for you to have that conversation with them. So you wouldn't go have it on, with someone that you absolutely don't know. But I guess what I'm saying is if you have that relationship with someone and you can sense that they're in pride, they might need to take responsibility and they need that justice conversation. If someone's in shame and beating themselves up, your job is to lift them up.
perfect. That's actually probably I think that might be the best framework I've ever heard. Like, yeah, dude, that's it. That's it. I'm gobsmacked. Like, yeah.
Mm.
And if
Yeah.
that's just, yeah, because there is a place for both, and it's all about bringing it to that balance.
Yep. And look,
Yeah.
I love this topic because I can go into it even more. So people wonder what is intuition. I'll tell you what intuition is. Intuition is that little voice that brings you back into the center. So have you ever guys who's listening had a voice where remember the framework, pride is above what you are, shame is below what you are. So pride is being a douchebag and looking down at people, and shame is looking up at people and being a doormat. Who you are is authentically when you're in the middle and you are being what you are, not below what you are, not above what you are, but what you are, right? And have you ever had that conversation when you're in the middle of a conversation and you just keep arguing and you're wrong, right? And there's a little voice that goes, you're wrong. Stop lying to yourself. And it's that little voice that's bringing you into the center. And then you also have a voice when you're really beating yourself up and you're like, oh man, I'm not good enough. I'm never going to be able to accomplish this. And you have a little voice that goes, yeah, you can. You can.
Mm,
Both of those voices are trying to direct you into the middle. Those voices are your intuition that's trying to guide you into authenticity. The whole game of life is to be as authentic as you possibly can. It's bringing you back into the center. So anytime you go up, its job is to lift you down. Anytime you go down, its job is to lift you up. And that is why when you're really down, you'll always have someone that comes to you and it's like, hey, man, you got this. It's okay. But anytime you get too elated and too excited, who's had those people who go, calm down? So it's the entire universe that's trying to bring you back into center. So anytime you go high, you'll notice either externally or internally, you'll have a mechanism that pulls you down, or even when you're down, you'll have a mechanism that's actually pulling you up. The whole game of the universe, or the way that God's created is to be as authentic as you possibly can. And I think the person who embodies perfect authenticity at all times was Jesus Christ. That's the most powerful thing.
Amen, bro. And I wonder if that authentic side of us is the side of us that is like almost like what, yeah, like made in the image, I guess. But I guess that's an assumption that the authentic self is like mostly pure, which I don't know if I fully agree with that. But I think
that's a whole different. You want to dive into that?
Maybe let's do that as a separate
because
episode,
we
I
have
reckon,
to unpack
that's
that
like
first.
that's like a big episode. I reckon that maybe the next episode we can do that. So I think that's an interesting topic that I've been wrestling with. And there's a few sermons I've listened to. Like John Mark Comer has a whole sermon on what is self, which is really interesting. But I think for the sake of
which I think it's important to recognize there are very different definitions as well.
That's right.
It's and I like these topics because what me and Poya tend to do, if anyone's listening and wants to know how it works, is like my job is to research methods that help people transform, so I can give them the best methods to help them transform. And as I research them, I also try it on myself. And then I also test it out and talk to Poya and go, hey, what do you think? Blah, blah, blah. And Poya always looks at it from a frame of how does this fit in with Christianity? Because at the end of the day, if Jesus is the one who has created us, right, he knows us best. So ultimately, the frame that Poya is coming from is how does this fit in with what Jesus would say about this? And it's always helped us kind of come to an even better truth of things. And there's definitely some things that me and Poya are still figuring it out, and some things that maybe we don't even agree on. So maybe we can even have that episode where we discuss it in a little bit more detail and explore it for those personal development nerds, if you're interested in that topic. But yeah.
I mean, that's gonna be a great topic. That's one I think we should do soon. Because I think that's also key to like a lot of our discourse, and how we kind of approach things as well. We always keep coming back to this idea of self. So I think that'll be great for the next episode. And
what is self? That's a good topic. Oh,
ties into self-help. What self-help? What is self?
Yeah.
Different understandings. Yeah. What is a Christian understanding of self? But I think you're absolutely right, man, about the about the intuition. I think even with addiction, I noticed that when, I don't know, I'm feeling particularly vulnerable and I've gone on Instagram and there's this voice in my head. It's like, boy, do you really want to be doing that? You really want to risk it, man? Do you really want to like, playing with fire? I'm like, no, I don't. And I'll get out of it. So I've definitely noticed that that's where also my intuition plays in, because I guess maybe you could say the self doesn't want to actually be an addict. Yeah, there's another point I wanted to make. We got to wrap up soon, but there's another point I wanted to make. We kind of touched on it before, but I think like I said before, we live in a world that's trying to capture our attention and pull us away. We have multiple black hands reaching out at us. And that's just a result of really a result of capitalism. And I'm no shade of capitalism. I think all forms of whatever, like communism, socialism, capitalism, I think they all have like value. So I'm not going to like get into that argument of what's better. But we live in a capitalistic society. And so by virtue of that, we're going to have a lot of people trying to capture our attention because that's the currency of the day. But I think it's important to acknowledge as well that there are like, nefarious spiritual forces at work. And I don't want to over spiritualize. I don't want to be like, everything's of the devil, the end is nigh. But yeah, there are spiritual forces at work trying to mess with us. And I think, we live in a spiritual realm, and I think that's important as well. And to tie into the practicalities of like how to overcome addiction, I think you have like the I guess the physical element, which is like, I think removing things that could trigger your addiction. So that's when Jesus says, cut off your hand if it's causing you sin. So if you struggle with porn, maybe like avoid like
Maybe like actually cut off your hand.
maybe cut off your hand.
Don't
Don't
cut
cut
off.
off. Don't cut off your hand. Please, please, please don't.
No, don't cut off your hand.
But don't
But it will
really.
stop you from watching porn. No, but
Yeah, but it will. It will.
I'll
But
take it.
I mean, you could if you can get a bionic hand, like maybe that's worth it because that'd be pretty sick. You're like a whole Luke Skywalker thing going. But man, Star Wars, freaking Luke Skywalker's the goat. But yeah, you haven't seen it. You have no idea what I'm talking about, Kev. But yeah, like it's like if you struggle with porn, right? Put like Covenant Eyes on your computer. It's like a accountability software. You know, block get apps where you can block certain browsers and get like safe browsers or those around. You can even like disable incognito mode on Chrome. I've done that on all my computers. And it's really annoying to do. So it's annoying to undo. So it's just like not even worth the effort of undoing it. So it's like sick. Like it's done, it's disabled. On your phone, like block any website that's dodgy or any app that will lead you to something dodgy, right? So it's like removing all the temptations. If you struggle with, eating junk food, maybe like don't bring it into your house. One of my favorite actors, Yahya Abdul-Mateen II, great actor, on his men's health video, he's like talking about all these sweets he loves, his cheat meals, but he's like, I don't bring it in the house because if I don't have it, I can't eat it. And that's why I never buy junk food. I'll never buy like I very rarely will buy a packet of chips or anything because I know if it's in the house, I'll demolish it. So I buy like nuts and stuff to stay healthy. So that's like the more physical, or even the friends you be careful about who you hang out with and what content you listen to. Some podcasts I don't listen to because it triggers addiction.
What we might do as well, Poya, because there's actually, as you're speaking, I'm realizing, man, there's so much to this topic. We can definitely do a second one. How about we do a second one?
Yeah, and I'll just wrap up with the last bit, the spiritual practicality thing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We should definitely come back to this topic at some point. But that's a physical side of how to deal with addiction. Oh, and join a program. Seriously, join a 12-step program. There's so many around for any type. There's sex addiction ones. There's obvious alcohol and drug, but they're around. Please, 12-step programs. I've had friends who've done them. I know the sex addiction ones are really helpful. There's like one. It's in Hornsby. I think it's Sex Addicts Anonymous. I've had friends who've done that. Super helpful. Recommend that. So join a program and get accountability. You can't do it on your own. You need people on your side. And if anyone says to you, well, you should be able to do it by yourself, that's honestly like that's not a friend. That's not a true friend. A true friend will come with you and be like, all right, we'll develop a program where I keep you accountable, say 7 days a week for the first, like every day for the first week, and then we kind of decrease it till you get to a level it's sustainable. So that's important. Have accountability, and if anyone shames you or if anyone says you should be able to do it by yourself, I genuinely believe they're not like a friend that you should trust. Keep them in as a friend, sure, but just know that they're not someone you can rely on. And that's another topic, maybe friendships, but like that's really important when you're in addiction. You need people in your corner. You really do, because if you have people who are not in your corner, it's going to make it worse. The last bit, which spiritual side, is one thing I've had helpful when I've had urges is just pray. And I know it sounds so like, just like it sounds so cliched and all that, but it does help. And I've noticed, Kevin, as you said before, when you prayed, things have happened. I know when I've prayed, I'm about to like go on a website, a friend will call, I'm like, oh, thank you, Lord. But it's also God's strength. You need his strength. You can't, man. We're so weak. Like we're corrupted by sin. So we need God. And that's, as you said, Kevin, the 12-step program always acknowledges, I can't do this on my own. I need a high power. There's that. And just spend more time in God's word. Like just soak yourself in scripture. Listen to really healthy sermons. Because what that does, the ideas you fill your brain with will also help you with your urges, right? Like if you're listening to like relationship podcasts all the time, all you're going to think about is relationships, right? And that may trigger your addiction. But if you like, I whenever I'm really bad with like my struggles, I don't listen to rap music, and I love rap music. I'll take a break because it like triggers addiction, right? Fill yourself with God's word. And you should do that. In terms of volume control, I think like most of the stuff you consume, make it Christian and then have the rest be non-Christian, right? But like majority Christian, just to set a baseline. There's that. So prayer, Bible reading, and have people praying over you, because that's powerful too. There are also deliverance ministries out there, where I haven't had much experience with that, but I've heard that's really helpful as well. But yeah, I think those are the two fronts. So on this physical, yeah, that's it. Kevin, do you have any thoughts on that?
I'll say a lot of the methods that I give are very unorthodox, are very, very different to what people have heard. So I'll say maybe we'll leave that for the next podcast. But I will say absolutely there is so much merit in simple things like praying. because it's doing that thing that we talked about. It's doing that thing where you're taking responsibility, but you're praying. So it's surrender by praying, but also take responsibility by doing what Poya says, which is it's almost like take the donut away 2 days before you go into the kitchen, so you don't have to be tempted by it. And that is taking responsibility. And the surrender is praying and going, God, help me overcome this addiction of maybe eating donuts. So it's use that framework of doing what you can. And we all know, if anyone is listening, if I ask you guys, write me a list of 10 things that you can do to overcome your addictions, even without consuming any content, you'll be able to come up with 10 things that you know you should do. So my suggestion would be do those things that you know that you should do, but at the same time surrender to a higher power and pray.
Yeah.
So that's the framework that I would give you, but there are more unorthodox methods that you guys probably haven't heard about, which will take me a little bit of time to introduce. So maybe we can talk about that in the next podcast.
Right, absolutely. Before we wrap up, there's some really helpful resources that I want to do a shout out for. So there's a church in Sydney called Anchor, really good church. They did a sermon a few years ago on addiction where an actual psychologist came in, and I found that really helpful. So we'll try and link that in the show notes for you guys. But if we can find it. But it's a great sermon. A non-Christian resource that I actually found helpful was a book by a guy called, Australian listeners, you would know him, Osher Günsberg, host of The Bachelor and other TV shows. He's struggled a lot with drug addiction. I read his autobiography last year, and it's powerful. Like, it's his journey, and it definitely was helpful for me with certain things I struggled with. So I'd really recommend that book. Another good Christian book on addiction, which I'll add to the show notes, I found helpful, is I think it's called Break Free by Vladimir. Savchuk, also, I can't say his last name. I apologize for mispronouncing it. But he's a Pentecostal pastor. He's very spiritually intense, so maybe he over spiritualizes a bit, but still, it's a great resource. So I think we'll try and link those in the show notes. But Kevin, do you have any resources you'd like to recommend?
Resources on addiction specifically?
Yeah.
No. I will say, based on what I've heard, 12-step really helps. But I would say the best resource is really just a friend that you can trust and a friend that you can really rely on. For me, I know that my addictions that I've dealt with, whether it's social media, porn at times, sugar, not doing the things I need to do, Netflix, whatever it is, me and Poya just chatting it out has really helped me in many, many ways. So find your own Poya. You probably can't though, but get your own Poya. But
we'll get your
thanks
own
guys.
as well.
Sweet. Thanks, bro. Thank you guys for listening, and I think we might go into next week's a little bit more deeper. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, guys, and shout out to Paul, Evening Train. That's our intro song, so shout out to him. It's an awesome song. Thank you guys for listening. Catch you next week. Much love.